King's guard presses emergency buzzer for serious help. Horse guards, King's guard, royal guard. The sun had not yet fully risen, but a pale glow was already brushing the tops of the tall buildings surrounding the horse guards parade. The square was quiet at first, almost eerily so, and only the distant hum of early city life could be heard. Among the quiet shadows, the horse guards stood tall and still, each one a picture of discipline and tradition. These men and women were not merely ceremonial figures. They were highly trained soldiers, sworn to protect the royal household, yet their presence often made the ordinary citizen forget the seriousness of their duties. Sergeant Thomas, a man in his late 30s with a sharp gaze and an unyielding posture, had served in the horse guards for over a decade. He was well respected among his peers for his dedication and sharp instincts. Unlike some of the younger guards who found the long hours of standing motionless tedious, Thomas had a deep sense of purpose in every stance he took and every glance he cast. To him, the uniform was more than cloth and metal. It represented centuries of history, honor, and responsibility. Each morning, before stepping onto the parade grounds, he would silently review the routines and possible scenarios in his mind, preparing for anything that might occur. On this particular morning, Thomas had noticed that the crowd gathering for the ceremonial changing of the guard seemed larger than usual. Tourists with cameras and eager children with wide eyes were spilling into the square, eager to catch a glimpse of the historical ceremony that had been performed here for hundreds of years. Despite the festive atmosphere, Thomas remained alert. Experience had taught him that where crowds gathered, unpredictable situations often arose. He scanned the edges of the square, noting the positions of both his fellow guards and the crowd, ensuring that nothing unusual went unnoticed. A few tourists whispered excitedly to one another, pointing at the bright uniforms and gleaming helmets of the guards. Horse guards in their red tunics and bearskin hats moved with meticulous precision. Horses snorted softly, stamping their hooves against the stone. For many, it was a perfect scene, almost like stepping into a history book. Yet beneath the surface, Thomas could sense a shift in the atmosphere. Something about the way a small group of visitors moved near the gate seemed off. They lingered too long, their eyes darting around nervously. Thomas squinted slightly, trying to get a better view. There was no immediate sign of danger, but his instincts, honed over years of service, told him to pay closer attention. As the minutes passed, the ceremonial band began to play, the notes floating across the square. The guards performed their routine with military precision, swinging their swords and executing perfectly timed movements. The crowd clapped and cheered, photographing every motion. Yet Thomas's mind was elsewhere. He noticed a figure in the distance, moving along the outer edge of the square. The person seemed agitated, shifting their weight from foot to foot, occasionally looking over their shoulder as if expecting someone. There was a tension in their body language that Thomas had seen before in training exercises, something that did not belong in a peaceful crowd. Thomas took a slow, deliberate breath, allowing his eyes to adjust to the early morning light and the subtle movements of the crowd. He did not make any sudden moves. Guards were trained to observe first and act only when necessary. The figure in question seemed harmless enough at a glance, yet every detail, from the pace of their steps to the way their hands fidgeted, made Thomas's instincts tighten like a drawn bowstring. He began signaling subtly with his eyes to the nearest colleague, a junior guard named Daniels, who had joined the horse guards only a year prior. Daniels nodded slightly, understanding the unspoken warning, "Keep watch and be ready." Time seemed to stretch as the ceremony continued. The crowd remained blissfully unaware of the tension under the surface, entirely captivated by the formal pageantry. Children waved flags, couples took selfies, and tourists marveled at the gleaming horses and sharp uniforms. But Thomas's eyes never left the suspicious figure, and he could not shake the feeling that something was about to happen. He reviewed every possible scenario in his mind. The figure could simply be a nervous tourist or perhaps someone lost, but the possibility of a threat, even a minor one, could not be ignored. In the horse guards, hesitation could be costly. Thomas's senses sharpened with every passing moment. He noticed how the figure kept their distance from others, moving with an almost unnatural care, avoiding close proximity yet staying within view of the palace gates. There was a rhythm to their movements, a kind of pacing that seemed deliberate. Thomas's heart rate did not rise with panic. Instead, it maintained a steady focus, the calm alertness that only years of experience could bring. He could feel the responsibility of his role pressing down on him like the weight of the ceremonial helmet on his head. This was not merely a performance. This was protection, and every second mattered. A sudden noise, small but distinct, a dropped camera bag in the crowd, made the figure flinch, and their eyes darted sharply toward the palace gates. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to Thomas, it was a confirmation that the person was aware of more than just the crowd. There was intention behind every step, and that intention could not be ignored. He shifted slightly, adjusting the position of his sword at his side, not in aggression but in readiness. Every muscle in his body was coiled, prepared for immediate action if necessary. The ceremony began to near its climax. Guards were about to switch positions, the horses prancing in perfect unison. Yet Thomas did not allow himself to be distracted by the rhythm and pageantry. He could feel the weight of history in every movement around him, and he knew that the centuries of tradition were built not just on ceremonial perfection, but also on discipline, vigilance, and the ability to act decisively when duty called. He allowed himself a brief thought. Even amidst this pageantry, real life could intrude at any moment, and when it did, preparation was everything. Then the figure made a subtle but decisive move, stepping closer to the edge of the gate, pausing briefly, then glancing toward the guards in a way that was too calculated to be accidental. Thomas recognized it instantly. This was the moment when instinct and training collided. He could feel a slight tingle in his fingertips, the signal to prepare for action. In his mind, the potential consequences of ignoring this behavior played out in rapid sequence. The crowd could panic, someone could get hurt, and the sanctity of the palace grounds could be compromised. Thomas knew that action, measured and precise, was required, but he also knew that he could not act recklessly. For a long minute, Thomas observed, analyzing every detail, every twitch, every step of the figure. The ceremonial music, the chatter of the crowd, the stamping of horse hooves, all faded into the background. In that moment, the world seemed to narrow down to the square, the figure, and the responsibility resting squarely on his shoulders. This was the paradox of the horse guard's life, standing still, performing for tourists, yet always ready to act decisively. It was a life of discipline, patience, and constant awareness. Finally, Thomas made a decision. He subtly reached for the emergency communication device, strapped discreetly to his uniform, a measure reserved for situations that demanded immediate attention. It was not a decision made lightly. To use it would mean that a potential threat had been recognized, and that every guard and officer in the vicinity would be called to respond. Yet Thomas understood that hesitation could be far more dangerous than caution. As he prepared, he remained calm, his outward appearance as composed as ever, betraying none of the tension building inside. And so, as the ceremonial drumbeat continued and tourists marveled at the grandeur of the moment, Sergeant Thomas stood silently, eyes fixed, ready to act. The world around him seemed unchanged, yet beneath the surface, the balance between peace and danger had shifted. Every detail mattered, the pacing of the figure, the reactions of the crowd, the precision of his fellow guards. In the heart of London, History and vigilance intertwined, and Thomas, the quiet sentinel, was at the center of it all. The stage was set. The ordinary morning had become extraordinary in the blink of an eye, and Sergeant Thomas knew that the coming moments would test every skill, every instinct, and every lesson he had learned in the years he had served. But one thing was certain: he would not falter, for he carried not just a uniform, but the weight of tradition, duty, and the lives of those around him. The crowd continued to gather, unaware that beneath the surface of the morning's ceremonial calm, a silent alert had already been triggered in the mind of Sergeant Thomas. He remained perfectly still, his posture rigid and disciplined, yet every sense in his body was heightened. The earlier moment of suspicion had evolved into something more pressing. The figure near the palace gates was no longer merely standing or pacing aimlessly. Now there was purpose in their movement, a subtle, deliberate shift that caught Thomas's trained eye. He noticed the way the figure's hands moved, how they glanced at the guards with quick, darting looks, almost as if measuring the distance and timing their next action. Thomas's gaze swept across the square again. He checked on his fellow guards, making brief eye contact with Daniels, the younger soldier. Daniels stiffened slightly, reading the unspoken signal. It was a quiet communication, a language of experience that didn't require words. Other guards seemed absorbed in the ceremony, but Thomas knew that even one moment of distraction could be enough for something serious to occur. His mind raced through scenarios. Most would seem far-fetched to a civilian, but each was real enough to consider in his line of duty. He calculated distances, timing, and the behavior of the crowd, mentally rehearsing every possible response. The figure, realizing that their movements might have been noticed, hesitated. For a moment they froze, scanning the square with cautious, measured eyes. Thomas took a slow breath, maintaining his composure while preparing for what might come next. He was trained to act decisively, but also to remain calm, because panic could ripple through the crowd and create chaos. Tourists continued to murmur and point their cameras, oblivious to the tension building just steps away. Children laughed and ran along the edges of the parade ground, excited by the horses and the shining uniforms. To an observer, it would seem like an ordinary morning, full of tradition and pageantry. Yet Thomas knew better. He had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. The quiet, the smiles, the music, all of it could mask danger until it was too late. He continued to observe the figure carefully, noting subtle signs: the flexing of fingers, the slight rocking of the body, and the way their eyes shifted constantly. Something in the figure's posture suggested anxiety mixed with determination. Thomas realized this could not be ignored. The potential threat, while still uncertain, was serious enough to require immediate attention. Deciding that subtle observation alone was not sufficient, Thomas took a cautious step forward, careful not to draw undue attention. Every move was precise, measured, designed to maintain the outward appearance of calm while improving his position for possible intervention. He scanned the surroundings, noting the crowd density, the position of fellow guards, and the accessibility of the palace gates. His mind was a machine, working quickly to anticipate the figure's next steps, weighing the safety of the tourists, the security of the palace, and the best approach for handling the situation without panic. As Thomas moved, the figure reacted almost imperceptibly, shifting slightly closer to the gate. Thomas's instincts screamed that something significant was about to happen. He signaled discreetly to another senior guard, Lieutenant Harris, using a combination of subtle hand gestures and eye movements that had been drilled into them through years of training. Harris responded instantly, adjusting his stance and subtly moving closer. The horse guards, though appearing statuesque and ceremonial, were all trained to respond to these silent signals in a heartbeat. The elegance of their uniformed discipline concealed a readiness honed through years of rigorous military preparation. Meanwhile, the crowd continued its innocent fascination with the ceremony. Cameras clicked, children clapped, and the musicians' brass instruments filled the air with lively notes. Tourists commented on the skill of the guards, unaware that behind the precise drill, a silent threat was unfolding. Thomas, however, felt the tension tighten like a string drawn taut. He knew that seconds could make the difference between a minor incident and something far more serious. He allowed his eyes to sweep across the square one more time, confirming that every angle was covered, every exit accounted for, and that his fellow guards were alert and ready. The figure paused for a moment near the edge of the gate, then moved again, this time with a subtle but deliberate motion that suggested intent. Thomas's pulse quickened, not in fear but in sharp alertness. The potential for danger had increased. He could not wait any longer. His hand reached for the small emergency communication device attached discreetly to his uniform. It was a simple action, yet it carried immense weight. Pressing it would signal that a serious situation required immediate backup from other security personnel and the police. It was not an action taken lightly. Once pressed, the emergency response protocol would activate instantly. Thomas pressed the buzzer. The signal was silent to the public but immediate within the security network. A series of quiet but urgent alarms echoed through the communication system, alerting officers in and around the palace that a situation required attention. Thomas did not flinch. He continued to monitor the figure, his eyes unwavering. The horse guards were trained for precision and calm in the face of uncertainty, and he embodied both. The figure seemed to sense the sudden, invisible shift in awareness. Their movements became slightly more hurried, more restless, betraying the presence of keen eyes upon them. Within moments, additional security personnel began moving quietly into position, blending into the crowd and approaching strategic points around the square. Thomas maintained his position near the center, keeping the figure within his line of sight. The ceremonial band played on, the tourists clapped, and the horses pranced, all while an invisible network of protection was converging. Thomas's heart remained steady. He understood that visible panic could cause a ripple effect in the crowd, potentially turning curiosity into chaos. His training reminded him that calmness could prevent fear from spreading. The figure suddenly glanced around, scanning the crowd and the guards, and Thomas noticed the subtle signs of decision-making in their posture. They were calculating, weighing options, and Thomas realized that the situation could escalate at any moment. He adjusted slightly, positioning himself so that he could intercept or respond immediately if necessary. Every instinct, every drilled response from years of training surged into focus. He was ready to act, but only when the moment required it. The power of patience and observation, so often underestimated by outsiders, was now at its peak. Thomas's colleagues, now aware of the situation, subtly shifted as well. Lieutenant Harris and Daniels moved closer without attracting attention, their silent coordination seamless. The crowd remained blissfully unaware of the unfolding tension. Thomas took note of exits, nearby structures, and possible interference points, mentally creating a map of control and response. He knew that every decision, every movement could affect the outcome. In the horse guards, tradition met readiness, and now the balance between ceremony and crisis was being tested. The figure finally made a small move toward the gate, and Thomas recognized the potential for escalation. He remained calm, using a combination of observation, positioning, and subtle signals to ensure his fellow guards were ready. The minutes seemed to stretch as the ceremonial drums continued to play and the band's melody filled the air. It was a surreal juxtaposition, the elegance of ceremony against the tension of unseen danger. Thomas reflected briefly that this was the essence of the horse guards: role, visible tranquility masking the readiness to respond to threats. Then, just as the figure paused again, Thomas made another small adjustment, moving slightly to maintain a clear line of sight and positioning himself for immediate intervention. He observed the figure carefully, noting every twitch, every glance, and every step. The potential for danger remained uncertain, yet Thomas knew that it was better to act with preparedness than to wait until a situation became irreversible. His training, experience, and calm focus allowed him to read the situation more clearly than anyone in the square, despite the distractions of tourists and ceremony. The crowd, meanwhile, continued to enjoy the spectacle, unaware that the events unfolding before them could have taken a very different turn. Children waved, cameras clicked, and the ceremonial guards executed their routines with perfect precision. Thomas's composure remained unshaken. He knew that for the moment, observation and readiness were the most important actions he could take. The figure, sensing the invisible watchful eyes, made one final hesitant move near the gate, a gesture that confirmed Thomas's suspicion. The potential for danger was real, and the situation was reaching a critical point. At that moment, Thomas realized that the next few seconds could determine the outcome of the entire situation. He was ready to act, but he remained calm, letting instinct, training, and careful observation guide him. The horse guards, those symbols of tradition and ceremony, were guardians of real security, and Thomas embodied that dual role. The rising tension in the square contrasted with the peaceful appearance, creating a quiet drama that only those trained to notice could perceive. The morning, once ordinary, had become a test of vigilance, judgment, and the quiet heroism that underpins centuries of ceremonial duty. The figure near the palace gates shifted again, this time moving with a more determined pace. Sergeant Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly, following every step, every twitch, every subtle movement. He could sense the moment of decision approaching, the instant when uncertainty would give way to action. The crowd continued to cheer and click their cameras, completely unaware of the silent tension building around them. Tourists pointed at the gleaming uniforms and polished boots, imagining the ceremony as a purely picturesque display. Few realized that beneath the show of tradition, a potential threat had already been detected, and every guard on the square was quietly holding their breath in readiness. Thomas's instincts, sharpened by years of service, told him that this was the critical moment. He had pressed the emergency buzzer, summoning backup that was already moving into position, but the first crucial seconds always depended on the guards who were already present. He could feel the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. Every person in the square, the tourists, the children, even the horses, was now within the radius of potential danger. Yet Thomas remained calm. He had learned that fear was a luxury a guardian could not afford. Calm observation and quick, decisive action were the only tools that could prevent disaster. The figure paused for a split second, then glanced toward Thomas with sharp, calculating eyes. There was no panic in their movements, only a deliberate, cautious assessment. Thomas noticed that the figure had started to adjust something in their coat pocket, a subtle motion that might have gone unnoticed to anyone else. His heart rate remained steady. His mind analyzed every possibility. He considered what the figure might be holding, the range of possible actions, and how to respond instantly if the situation escalated. He was ready to intercept, block, or deflect, whatever might be necessary to protect those around him. Nearby, Lieutenant Harris and Daniels positioned themselves strategically, closing ranks in a quiet, unobtrusive formation. Every guard was alert, eyes scanning the crowd, every hand subtly placed near communication devices and protective gear. The palace security network, silently triggered by Thomas's buzzer, had begun coordinating movements with officers stationed at entrances and exits. The elegance of the ceremonial square masked a web of preparedness that only those trained to see it could detect. Thomas knew that seconds could make the difference between a routine morning and a full-blown incident. Then the figure made a sudden move. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried intention. Thomas reacted instantly. He shifted his weight slightly, adjusting his position to place himself between the figure and the crowd, while keeping his posture calm and composed. The horses, sensing the subtle tension, stamped their hooves lightly but remained under control, guided by their experienced riders. To anyone watching, the scene still seemed like a ceremonial morning, full of tradition and pageantry. But in Thomas's mind, the ordinary appearance was deceptive. Every second now mattered. The figure began to step closer to the main entrance of the palace grounds, as if testing the reaction of the guards. Thomas's voice was calm but firm as he issued a quiet command to his team. "Keep your positions. Watch the exits. Don't panic the crowd." His words were precise, each one a signal to fellow guards, reinforcing coordination without drawing attention. Lieutenant Harris moved a fraction closer, mirroring Thomas's stance, while Daniels subtly positioned himself to cover a side approach. Their silent choreography was seamless, the result of years of training that combined discipline, awareness, and instinct. Thomas noticed a slight change in the figure's gait. They were faster now, movements sharper, more purposeful. He realized the potential for escalation had grown. The person might attempt to approach the gates, test the boundaries of the guards' attention, or create a disturbance that could put others at risk. Thomas's mind raced through possibilities, but he kept his outward composure intact. He had learned long ago that the public's perception of calm was as important as the reality of control. Panic could spread faster than any action, and it was his job to prevent it. The crowd's laughter and chatter formed a soft background hum, almost like the noise of a river flowing past the edge of danger. Thomas kept scanning, noting every individual, every movement. He noticed a child leaning too close to the rope barrier, a camera dangling from a tourist's neck, and the figure's eyes flicking in those directions. Even minor distractions mattered. The ability to anticipate them could prevent accidents. Thomas's training allowed him to process all these details at once: the crowd, the figure, the horses, and his fellow guards, simultaneously considering strategy and safety. Suddenly, the figure made a decisive step toward the gate. Thomas tightened his grip on the hilt of his ceremonial sword, not to draw it, but as a physical reminder to remain ready. His eyes never left the person, analyzing posture, predicting the next movement, and coordinating silently with Harris and Daniels. Backup officers, now quietly approaching from nearby streets and entrances, were in place, blending into the environment so as not to alarm the tourists. The tension in the air was almost tangible, yet the outward appearance remained ceremonial perfection. The figure paused near the edge of the gate, glancing quickly around the square. Thomas noted the way they shifted their weight, subtly assessing reactions. It was clear now that the person had a plan, however unclear it was to an outsider. Thomas knew that timing was critical. Too early a move could escalate unnecessarily, too late could allow an incident to occur. He remained steady, using every ounce of experience and instinct to predict the figure's next action. The seconds stretched, measured not by clocks but by careful observation and quiet calculation. Then, almost imperceptibly, the figure reached for something in their pocket. Thomas reacted without hesitation. He stepped slightly forward, positioning himself squarely in the line of sight, while keeping his voice calm and low, ready to issue commands if necessary. The crowd remained unaware, mesmerized by the horses and uniforms, yet Thomas's mind was fully engaged in the moment. Every muscle was tense, every sense alert, ready to respond at a moment's notice. This was the essence of the horse guard's dual role: ceremonial display and real-life vigilance. The figure froze for a split second, then moved again, closer to the gates. Thomas assessed the movement, predicting the possible intentions. His instincts screamed that action was imminent. He signaled quietly to Harris, who nodded almost imperceptibly, and Daniels, who shifted to cover a potential side approach. Backup officers were now in position, ready to intervene if needed. The figure's subtle but deliberate steps indicated that they were testing the guards' patience and reaction time. Thomas realized this could not continue without intervention. With a controlled and deliberate motion, Thomas spoke quietly, his voice carrying authority without raising alarm. "Step back and remain calm," he instructed, ensuring that his tone could be heard by the figure but not by the crowd. The words were firm, commanding, and precise, a reminder that control rested with the guards. The figure hesitated, then shifted slightly, as if reassessing the situation. Thomas held his ground, unwavering, a silent symbol of discipline and readiness. In that moment, the tension reached its peak. The crowd remained blissfully unaware, the ceremonial music continuing as if nothing had changed. Yet Thomas knew the turning point had arrived. The figure was close to testing the boundaries, and the next action could escalate quickly. He adjusted his stance, preparing to intervene physically if necessary, while keeping his movements calm and controlled. The training, discipline, and experience of years of service converged in that precise moment, guiding his decisions and movements. The figure, sensing the invisible web of observation and preparation, paused once more. Thomas saw the hesitation, the subtle doubt flicker across their movements. This was the moment when careful observation and readiness could prevent a crisis. Backup officers were now visible at the edges of the square, a silent reinforcement of authority. Thomas remained the center of focus, a calm and commanding presence. Every instinct told him that action, if needed, must be immediate, but patience was equally important. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the figure took a small step back, reassessing. Thomas maintained his position, unwavering, while the surrounding guards and officers subtly adjusted to ensure the perimeter was secure. The tension did not disappear, but it shifted, no longer purely anticipation, but a delicate balance of control and readiness. The situation had reached its turning point. The potential threat was real, the response had been activated, and the outcome now depended on measured, precise action. Thomas allowed himself a quiet, almost imperceptible sigh of relief, though he remained fully alert. The figure had not yet caused harm, but the careful coordination and rapid response of the horse guards, under his leadership, had prevented escalation. The moment highlighted the delicate balance between ceremony and security, the invisible vigilance that protected the palace and its visitors. In that split second, Thomas had fulfilled the true purpose of the uniform he wore, not just to display tradition, but to safeguard lives. The moment of tension began to ease, but the air around the horse guards' parade remained thick with anticipation. The figure near the palace gates had retreated slightly, taking a hesitant step back, and the crowd, still unaware of the danger that had almost unfolded, continued to marvel at the ceremonial display. Sergeant Thomas maintained his composure, though internally he was processing everything that had just occurred. His eyes continued to sweep the square, noting every detail, every movement, ensuring that the potential threat had truly been neutralized. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but he knew that vigilance could not end until the situation was fully secured. Lieutenant Harris and Daniels mirrored Thomas's careful attention, their training keeping them alert while appearing calm to the unsuspecting crowd. Backup officers had now arrived and quietly took up positions along the perimeter, blending seamlessly into the surroundings. Their presence reinforced the security network without alarming anyone. Thomas noted their positions, confirming that every access point, every possible angle of approach, was covered. It was a delicate balance, maintaining the appearance of a peaceful, ceremonial morning while managing the invisible layers of security and potential threat. The figure near the gate was now under careful observation. Officers began moving closer, approaching in a calm, coordinated manner designed to avoid alarming the crowd. Thomas signaled subtly, ensuring that no sudden movements would startle tourists or disrupt the ceremony. Every step was calculated, each action deliberate. He could feel the tension in the square slowly shifting from immediate danger to controlled containment. The potential for escalation had decreased, but the responsibility to ensure safety remained as intense as ever. Thomas's mind reviewed the chain of events, each detail reinforcing the importance of vigilance. He thought about how quickly an ordinary morning could turn into a dangerous situation, and how small decisions made in seconds could prevent harm. The incident was a reminder of the dual role of the Horse Guards, to uphold centuries of tradition while remaining ready to respond to real-life threats. Their training, discipline, and calm under pressure had transformed what could have been chaos into controlled safety. Nearby, tourists were still taking photos and marveling at the horses, unaware of the invisible drama that had unfolded just steps away. Children laughed, pointing at the guards, shiny helmets and polished boots. Couples smiled and clapped, commenting on the beauty and precision of the ceremony. To an observer, it seemed as though nothing had changed. Yet Thomas knew that the calm was fragile, maintained only by the quiet presence and readiness of the guards and officers. The balance between public enjoyment and safety had been preserved, but only by careful, disciplined action. The figure, now fully surrounded by officers, was being guided quietly and firmly away from the gate. Thomas watched every movement, ensuring that the situation remained under control. There was no resistance, no panic, only a slow realization that their actions had been noticed and contained. It was a moment of clarity for Thomas, highlighting the importance of preparedness and the subtle power of calm authority. The crowd remained unaware, continuing to focus on the spectacle before them, but Thomas understood that the outcome had been determined by vigilance, quick thinking, and seamless coordination. Lieutenant Harris approached Thomas quietly, giving a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Daniels mirrored the gesture. It was a silent recognition of the effectiveness of their teamwork and of Thomas's leadership in guiding the response. The emergency buzzer had ensured rapid deployment of backup officers, but the initial moments, when quick thinking was most crucial, had depended entirely on the guards already present. Thomas allowed himself a brief mental note of satisfaction. The threat had been contained, and the crowd remained safe. Yet he remained fully alert, knowing that the aftermath still required careful management. The detained figure was led away by the officers, their movements calm but firm, ensuring that no sudden disturbance would reach the onlookers. Thomas continued to monitor the crowd, noting subtle reactions and ensuring that the ceremonial routine remained uninterrupted. He moved slowly, adjusting his stance and position, demonstrating both readiness and calm to maintain control over the square. The elegance of the ceremony provided a natural cover for the officers' actions, allowing the situation to resolve quietly without drawing attention. As the minutes passed, Thomas reflected on the potential consequences of what had almost occurred. Had he hesitated, had he misread the signs, the outcome could have been very different. He thought about the lessons reinforced by this incident, the importance of observation, the value of calm authority, and the critical role of coordination between officers. Every detail mattered, from the positioning of the guards to the subtle use of signals and communication devices. The morning had become a vivid demonstration of the hidden responsibilities behind ceremonial duty. Tourists continued to take photos and comment on the guards' precision, unaware of the invisible tension that had almost unfolded. Children waved flags and laughed, couples whispered and pointed, and the band played on with cheerful notes. The ceremonial display had resumed its full rhythm, yet the air was subtly different. Thomas's presence, and that of his fellow guards, ensured that safety had been preserved. It was a quiet victory, a testament to professionalism, training, and calm decision-making under pressure. The palace security team began reviewing the situation quietly, speaking in hushed tones to avoid alarming the public. Officers noted the actions of the figure, the response of the horse guards, and the seamless coordination that had prevented escalation. Thomas listened to the reports, confirming that the perimeter was secure and that no further threat remained. He maintained his position, still scanning the crowd, still ensuring that every angle was covered. The immediate danger had passed, but the responsibility to protect remained as vital as ever. In the aftermath, Thomas noticed subtle reactions from the tourists. Some children whispered excitedly to their parents, pointing at the guards, alert expressions and disciplined movements. Adults commented on the professionalism and calm of the guards, although none suspected the seriousness of the situation that had just been contained. Thomas allowed himself a brief smile, realizing that their visible composure had preserved the peaceful image of the ceremony. Their calm had prevented panic, allowing the morning to continue without disruption. Horses stamped lightly, sensing the residual tension in the air, and their riders adjusted reins and posture to maintain control. Thomas observed this carefully, aware that even animals could sense unease and respond unpredictably. The balance of control extended beyond the human elements of security. It included the careful management of the environment and all living participants. His training had taught him to notice these details, and today, that awareness had contributed to the successful management of the situation. Thomas reflected quietly on the lessons reinforced by the morning's events. The potential threat had highlighted the importance of discipline, the value of keen observation, and the necessity of remaining calm under pressure. Every decision, from the initial observation of the figure to the pressing of the emergency buzzer, had been made with careful consideration. The coordination of the guards and backup officers had ensured that the situation remained contained, demonstrating the effectiveness of training and preparedness. As the ceremony continued, Thomas's thoughts turned to the broader implications. The incident had been a reminder that even in moments of tradition and pageantry, vigilance was essential. The horse guards were not only a symbol of history and elegance, but also a critical component of real-life security. Every stance, every movement, every glance carried meaning, and the hidden layers of readiness were as important as the visible display. Thomas understood that the calm morning, preserved for the enjoyment of the public, had been the result of careful planning, training, and quick thinking. The detained figure was escorted to a secure location, where officers began questioning to determine intent and assess risk. Thomas continued his role on the parade ground, maintaining vigilance while allowing the ceremonial display to proceed. His presence reassured his fellow guards and provided continuity, ensuring that the balance between security and tradition remained intact. The public remained unaware, witnessing only the precision and discipline of the horse guards, unaware that the morning had almost taken a very different turn. As the minutes stretched into the later part of the morning, Thomas allowed himself a moment to breathe, though his eyes never left the square. The figure had been removed, backup officers were in position, and the crowd remained peaceful. The situation had been resolved, yet the experience reinforced the critical importance of readiness, observation, and calm authority. The horse guards, though ceremonial in appearance, had proven their role as vigilant guardians, capable of responding decisively when the need arose. The crowd continued to enjoy the ceremony, unaware of the invisible tension that had been resolved so expertly. Children waved flags, tourists clicked cameras, and couples admired the guards' precision. Thomas moved slowly along his position, observing, adjusting, and ensuring that every angle remained secure. The elegance of the moment masked the complexity of the actions that had preserved safety. But Thomas knew that it was this very combination of discipline and readiness that defined the true role of the horse guards. As the ceremony drew to a close, Thomas allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The morning had begun as an ordinary day of tradition, yet it had transformed into a test of vigilance, coordination, and calm decision-making. The potential threat had been managed effectively, thanks to experience, training, and instinct. Thomas understood that every guard on the square had played a vital role, and the seamless cooperation had preserved both public safety and the ceremonial rhythm of the palace grounds. The morning had gradually returned to its calm, ceremonial rhythm, yet Sergeant Thomas remained alert. The figure that had caused tension near the palace gates had been removed, and the backup officers had taken control of the situation. However, Thomas understood that vigilance could never truly be relaxed. The horse guard's duty was continuous, unbroken by the passing moments, for any lapse could result in consequences too serious to imagine. He scanned the square one last time before allowing himself a subtle shift in stance, a small acknowledgement that the immediate threat had passed. The tourists continued to marvel at the scene, pointing and taking photos, completely unaware of the drama that had almost unfolded before their eyes. Children laughed as they waved small flags, and couples whispered to each other, capturing the beauty and precision of the ceremonial display. To them, it was an ordinary day of tradition, elegance, and history. Yet for Thomas and his fellow guards, the morning had been anything but ordinary. Each step of the day had tested their discipline, their judgment, and their ability to act decisively in the face of uncertainty. Lieutenant Harris approached Thomas quietly, nodding in approval. Daniels, though young and relatively inexperienced, mirrored the gesture, a small smile of relief on his face. There was an unspoken sense of accomplishment among the team. They had faced a potential threat, acted swiftly, and preserved the safety of the palace grounds and the visitors. It was a moment that required no applause, for their success was measured not in recognition, but in the absence of disaster. The calm that had returned to the square was itself the proof of their effectiveness. Thomas reflected on the morning's events as he adjusted his uniform and took his position with renewed focus. Every detail mattered. The precise observation of the figure, the decision to press the emergency buzzer, the coordination with backup officers, and the silent communication with his fellow guards. Each action had contributed to a seamless response, turning a potentially dangerous situation into a controlled resolution. He understood that the public only saw the ceremonial performance, but behind that performance was vigilance, discipline, and quick thinking. The figure had been escorted to a secure location, where officers began questioning to determine intent. Thomas knew that such situations often involved unexpected variables, and he trusted the backup team to handle the investigation with care and professionalism. Meanwhile, he continued his watch, observing the crowd and ensuring that the ceremonial routine remained uninterrupted. His presence reassured both the public and his colleagues, maintaining the delicate balance between tradition and security. As the minutes passed, Thomas allowed himself a rare moment to reflect on the broader significance of the day. The horse guards were symbols of history, elegance, and discipline, yet their role extended far beyond ceremonial display. They were guardians, trained to respond to threats with precision and composure. The morning had been a vivid reminder of the duality of their duty, outwardly still and composed, yet ready to act decisively when circumstances demanded. Thomas felt a deep sense of pride in fulfilling that role. The crowd gradually began to disperse, moving toward nearby streets and attractions, chatting excitedly about the ceremony they had witnessed. Thomas observed them with a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that the peace and order they had experienced were the direct result of careful observation and disciplined action. The tension that had gripped the square earlier in the morning had been transformed into a lesson in calm authority and preparedness. Every detail of the response had mattered, from the subtle positioning of guards to the coordinated approach of backup officers. Lieutenant Harris spoke quietly to Thomas, acknowledging the effectiveness of the response. Daniels, still young but growing in confidence, listened intently, absorbing the lessons of the morning. Thomas allowed himself to feel a subtle pride, not in personal recognition, but in the knowledge that the team had worked seamlessly to protect the public and maintain the integrity of the ceremonial display. It was a reminder that true accomplishment in their line of duty often went unseen, measured only in the safety and calm of those they protected. Thomas walked slowly along the parade square, his eyes scanning the crowd one final time. The horses, now calm, shifted lightly under their riders' control, and the ceremonial band began to pack up their instruments. The square, once filled with tension and uncertainty, had returned to a sense of normalcy. Yet Thomas knew that the morning's events would linger in his mind, a reminder of the importance of readiness, discipline, and calm judgment. Every ceremonial movement, every glance, and every decision had contributed to the seamless resolution of a potentially serious situation. As he moved, Thomas thought about the lessons for his fellow guards. The importance of observation, the value of quick decision-making, and the necessity of calm authority had been demonstrated vividly. Every guard, whether experienced like Harris or newer like Daniels, had played a vital role. Thomas reflected on how teamwork, training, and silent communication had allowed them to manage the situation without alarming the public. The incident highlighted not only individual skill, but also the power of coordinated action and shared responsibility. The morning had begun as an ordinary ceremonial routine, but it had become a test of vigilance and professionalism. Thomas understood that such tests were not always publicized, and recognition was often quiet, subtle, or entirely absent. Yet the satisfaction of knowing that they had prevented harm, maintained order, and preserved the ceremonial tradition was a reward in itself. It reinforced the dedication, discipline, and sense of duty that defined the Horse Guards. Officers conducting the follow-up investigation had determined that the figure posed a potential risk, though the exact intent remained uncertain. Thomas observed from his post, noting the careful, professional handling of the situation. Backup officers worked diligently, ensuring that the individual was questioned thoroughly and that all procedures were followed. Thomas knew that the security measures, combined with his initial observation and decisive action, had transformed a potentially dangerous scenario into a controlled, safe resolution. The public continued to enjoy the square, unaware of the near crisis. Children ran lightly along the edges, couples walked hand in hand, and tourists continued to photograph the elegant display of uniforms and horses. The beauty and tradition of the ceremony remained intact, shielded from the tension that had almost interrupted it. Thomas allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection, recognizing the hidden significance of his role. While the public enjoyed the spectacle, the guards ensured that safety was maintained, a silent testament to their dedication and professionalism. Thomas thought about the long-term impact of the morning's events. Beyond the immediate resolution, the experience reinforced the value of preparedness and calm authority for every guard on duty. Each person involved had learned lessons that would strengthen their ability to respond to future challenges. Thomas felt a sense of pride in knowing that the morning had been a practical demonstration of the principles and training that guided the Horse Guards' work: vigilance, discipline, teamwork, and calm judgment. As the day progressed, Thomas allowed the ceremonial duties to continue with a sense of quiet reassurance. Every step, every stance, and every glance was executed with renewed focus, a reflection of the lessons learned from the near incident. The horse guards continued to symbolize tradition and elegance, but Thomas understood that beneath the polished uniforms and ceremonial routines lay an unwavering readiness to respond to real-life threats. The morning had proven the delicate balance between spectacle and security, tradition and vigilance. The crowd gradually thinned, leaving the square quieter than it had been in hours. Thomas and his fellow guards continued their duties, maintaining perfect composure and discipline. He reflected on the invisible layers of responsibility that defined their role: observation, assessment, coordination, and intervention when necessary. The day had tested these layers, and Thomas felt satisfaction in knowing that every aspect of their training had contributed to the successful resolution. In the calm aftermath, Thomas considered the significance of the public's experience. Visitors had witnessed only the ceremonial display, unaware of the near crisis that had unfolded just steps away. Yet the smooth continuation of the morning's events was a testament to the professionalism, training, and judgment of the horse guards. Thomas understood that the public's perception of safety and order relied on the quiet diligence of those who stood as silent sentinels, ready to act when needed. As Thomas prepared to step away for a brief rest, he took a final glance at the square. The incident had reinforced the importance of discipline, observation, teamwork, and calm authority. It had been a moment of tension, challenge, and decisive action, but it had ended without harm, preserving both public safety and ceremonial tradition. Thomas knew that this day would remain in his memory as a demonstration of the quiet heroism that defined the horse guards, an embodiment of duty, vigilance, and unwavering professionalism.